Welcome to Paradigms at paradigms.life. Hi, I'm Baruch, host of the show. Thanks for tuning in. Glad to be here with you. Paradigms is here to bring you inspiring people, and we've got a wonderful guest on this episode who has created her own genre, Indo Latin Jazz, and she's just released a record inspired by the multiverse. She's going to tell us all about that. We're going to hear some of this great music and have some time to explore what is the multiverse and how is it a part of your life. All right, let's meet her right now on this episode of Paradigms. Mariah Parker, welcome to Paradigms.
Thank you for having me. A pleasure.
I'm really glad to talk with you. I just listened to your record, Windows Through Time, and it's really beautiful, and I had a great time listening to it, and it's the kind of music that allows you to just sort of travel in your mind and go where you go and sort of clarify and all that kind of, it's like a trip.
Yeah. Nice to hear.
I want to talk with you about the record and the music, but first I just want to learn a little bit about you as a person, about your life, about how you ended up playing that magnificent instrument I see behind you and composing this great music. What's your story?
What's my story? Well, I come from a musical family. So my dad was a cantor, gorgeous voice. We had a grand piano in the house when I grew up. I had three brothers. We all either played piano or guitar or both. And, I guess part of my story was that, my dad died when I was fairly young, and music was always, in some ways, I feel like music saved me. Music was my refuge. The piano was my best friend during hard times. It's just like music was the thing that inspired me my entire life. There's a way in which through our lives we sort of follow the path of the muse. And, that led me on all kinds of paths, but I ended up doing my degree in music at UC Santa Cruz. At the time, I ended up working with an ethnomusicologist, Fred Lieberman, who was working with Mickey Hart on the Planet Drum and Drumming at the Edge of Magic project. So, I ended up becoming involved with that, and it was coincidentally like a convergence of three really deep threads for me musically. I was doing my degree, so I was, of course, listening to a wide range. I was fascinated by some of the classical composers, Bartók and Erik Satie and Steve Reich with his, very fascinating use of odd meters. So, just kind of getting expanded in what spoke to me there. I was also really influenced by jazz artists at the time, that opened different doors for me. Keith Jarrett and what he was doing, Herbie Hancock, Maiden Voyage, like a lot of different sounds that just opened me up. And I was like, what's this? Let me absorb this, So there were those two strands. And then a third strand was the musical cultures of the world and what, how those languages connect, and how they all connect with our common humanity, at a cellular level. So it was just sort of drinking those in. And then I became there's somewhat of a fourth strand that's connected, which was the ECM stream, the ECM artist. So Keith Jarrett, Egberto Gismonti from Brazil, Oregon, the first chamber jazz ensemble just absolutely blew my mind. So that's part of the story, and then years later, coming to work with one of my musical heroes, Paul McCandless, who's, on this record on every track. And I've worked with him for the last 15, 16, maybe 17 years by now. But so all those streams, it was just sort of drinking them in. And it was about, yeah, probably 17 years ago, something like that, that it sort of distilled into this particular direction that I've given the name Indo Latin Jazz, where kind of the primary streams of inspiration are the musical cultures of Brazil, Cuba, India, Spain, and then contemporary jazz. That was when I connected with Paul McCandless, the horn player who goes way back to the Paul Winter Consort, Oregon. And, honestly, it's just been one of the major joys and honors of my life to work so closely with him for so long. So that's kind of been the arc that and the distillation. And so this is the third of the musical of the recordings I've done. And it was a really, really great joy to bring in another Oregon alumni, Mark Walker, on drums. So we joke that we had half of Oregon, in the house.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm talking with Mariah Parker about her new album, Windows Through Time. We'll be back with more of this conversation. Let's hear a track now, the first one on the record, The Very Wings, Mariah Parker, from her new record, Windows Through Time. You're listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life. That one's called The Very Wings, and it's the first track on Mariah Parker's new album, Windows Through Time. Let's get back to my conversation with Mariah Parker. One of the things you just said was you said the music opened me up. I mean, it does that for us. That's part of the gift, is that it really can open us up if we're willing.
Yes.
And that means different things to different people.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Paul Winter was on this show, so.
Oh, sweet.
Wonderful that you've worked with Paul McCandless so much, because he is phenomenal.
Paul Winter recently did a wonderful thing of calling from all the archives of the Paul Winter concert for Paul's most brilliant oboe work. And anyway, he did an album dedicated to that, which was really wonderful.
That is so great. Let's talk about Windows Through Time.
Yeah.
Firstly, the name is incredibly evocative. You know, so what does that mean to you? What inspired these pieces and this theme?
It was interesting with this project because some of the pieces I composed earlier on, some were newer, a fair bit were new, but the way they all live together, it was kind of a revelation over time. You set out on a project, and the project always takes you on a journey, and it was kind of a revelation in the process how coherent the pieces lived and what the arc of them evokes. The title of the title track and the album, Windows Through Time, it was catalyzed by an experience that I've been kind of thinking through how best to describe it, as I've done concerts or as I've been trying to articulate it. As we journey through life and we make decisions, we sort of like tributaries, we choose pathways. And in the realm of quantum physics, there's a theory that exists, whether or not it's true, but that speaks to all those other potential pathways existing somewhere in time and space. And so I had a deep experience where it was through sort of memories arising and, another encounter with somebody from long ago, where I literally experienced that sense of bumping up against like just a gossamer film separating potentiality, other possibilities. Over time, I'm going to have to distill this into a better articulation. But that was the revelation. And there was something very liberating about it. This sense of time, the time-space continuum folding on itself and us moving through something that we assume moves linearly. But that felt experience was revelatory. That's what I feel was captured in the title track.
While I was listening to the record, I was sort of contemplating the multiverse a bit. So you accomplished communicating
Lovely.
What you just described to the
Wow.
music.
Nice.
And it is a fascinating idea or possibility or reality, that all times exist simultaneously in all their possibilities, and that is vast beyond our comprehension. Which I think can give us a perspective on what we are experiencing in our mental linearity. That this is not the whole show.
Yeah.
And it is so easy to become absorbed by the minutia, and even not minutia, but the important events of our time and our lives and what's happening. And that is important. That is not without value or significance. And at the same time, it's not the whole picture. And I like remembering that.
Yeah. And what gives me a lot of joy when we do concerts is getting the feedback of the music opening people up on a deep level, and how I experience that. I think that is one of the really potent elements of music.
Yeah.
Is its ability to do that.
You're hitting all my questions before I ask them. Because one of the things I like to ask is what happens in the room. And you can feel what happens, even if everyone is sitting with rapt attention. You can feel it.
Yeah. One of my dear friends, talks about it like the experience is very much for her like a comet, and it really takes her out. But I get a lot of feedback in that way, and you do feel it. It's also, I think, like any good musical experiences, there's a synergy that happens amongst the musicians, so there's that synergy, and then between the musicians and the audience. And it really is a dance, an energetic dance. And it's, I think, one of the most exhilarating things.
Synergy is one of my favorite words, more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
We'll be back with more conversation with Mariah Parker after we hear this track, the title track from her new record, Windows Through Time. Parker, the title track from her new record, Windows Through Time. Now let's get back to our conversation with Mariah Parker. You have assembled such fantastic folks, the players on this record, and the synergy of you all playing together is, well, you can't miss it. It's right there. And I was listening and I was hearing, the different types of percussion, your piano playing and the bass and the guitar and the cello. I mean, it was just like, wow, it's such a full complement.
Mm-hmm.
How did that come about? I mean, did you imagine this full sound? Did it happen? I mean, there are always the wonderful accidents, but how did that happen?
One of the really new things on this album was bringing in drum set. Prior to this, it was mainly with various kinds of percussion. And this album, where the new pieces went and where it was going, really became clear that it needed drum set. And Paul and I were talking, and he said, "Oh my God, Mark Walker would be just incredible on this." So he lives in Boston. He teaches at Berklee College of Music. He is touring like crazy all the time. And he's just one of the incredible human beings. But just went with that inspiration, both of course, for the sound. I realized, yeah, he would just be the perfect one for this project. And also for the joy of bringing him and Paul back together, because they hadn't played together in 5 years. And he was with Oregon for about 20 years after Trilot Gertu. That brought about a real shift in the sound, which I loved. That's one of the things about a studio project is you can really go for your vision. So I made, the choices to have that drum set, to bring in there are the players that I've worked with for a long time. Matthew Montfort on the scallop fretboard guitar. He's a longtime collaborator. The way that the frets are scalloped, gives him that ability to get those beautiful, incredible, subtle bends on the notes. And Paul, of course, who I've worked with for a long time. So there were certain things that were already in play. I did work with a few different bass players who brought kind of a different quality, so there was just a couple where it was like, I really want, this, person on these pieces. And when Mark was out here for 2 of the tracks, he was on tour with Arturo Sandoval. So he's been touring like crazy with him. And he brought in Danny Feldman, who really was wonderful on the congas and on, the other percussion, Michaelle Goerlitz, Ian Dogole on cymbals and cajon, so I had the vision for each piece. And also, things would reveal themselves in rehearsals with such, amazing musicians. So that was the process.
This is not a COVID remote project. This was playing together in the studio live.
Yeah. During some of the COVID time, that was actually what we did, but it was definitely not a remote project. It was in the studio. There's a wonderful studio in Oakland, and it occurred over a period of about a year. We had about 5 sessions. Very, very much live.
We'll be back with more conversation with Mariah Parker after we hear another track from Windows Through Time. This one's called True North. And as you listen, just consider, what is your true north? What guides you? And if there is such a thing as the multiverse, what guides you through all of the possibilities of life, all of the possibilities of existence? It's more than you can even imagine. All right, here's True North. You're listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life. That one's called True North, Mariah Parker, from her new album, Windows Through Time. Now here's the next part of my conversation with Mariah. You made this record, and obviously, as you've said, you perform live. And how is that happening with this music? Because you probably can't get this whole group together to perform.
I'm working on getting some shows going where I do have most of the people on the album, but the core, we still all perform together, the core of it. So I have a wonderful, Bay Area drummer, on the project. And actually the rest of the group, I can pull, from my bass players that I've worked with on the project. So we can be true to the sound. It's always different, which is part of the beauty of it. It's always a different journey, but we can be very true to the kind of essence of the music and the main aspect of the sound.
So where does the music come from? I love asking this question because the answers are always different, but where does it come from? I mean, do you hear it in your head? Do you think about it? Do you get an idea? Do you hear a sound that inspires you? Do you wake up in the middle of the night with something? What happens? Some
different versions of several of those. I experience it as a relationship with the muse, definitely. Doesn't happen very often, but a few pieces have come fully formed in the middle of the night, that sort of thing, complex pieces, and they just roll out. But that's pretty rare. Paul joked about that one time. He said, yeah, it's nice when you get it in the mail.
That is.
But more often, they come in different ways. Like when I was working on the title track, that was like feeling breadcrumbs from this experience. So it was very much like being guided by this expression of what I was experiencing. So a lot of times I sit at the piano. That's, where I compose pretty much for the most part. Although I might hear an idea and then write it down and then expand that. So there was sort of that kind of way that they come through. And with that, sometimes, again, there's an unfolding that happens at the piano. Sometimes it takes a little while. I feel that as a relationship with the muse. I'm listening, but it's an active listening. And it's a process I really trust, so it sort of unfolds. And then there might be a refining process, write the chart, and then kind of, I might want to work with some of the harmonics, the chords, or how I hear things. So there can be like a polishing process on it. There's the inspiration and following the muse, and then there's the craft. Other pieces, because I've been so fascinated by rhythm, I might have a rhythmic idea, that kind of is the seed that kickstarts the process. That's probably true to some extent a little bit with Espiritu Samba, which is, kind of in a 7/8 rhythm. So some pieces might be triggered or catalyzed by a rhythm, and then that kind of leads to, oh, I hear the melody. Oh, I hear it, So for me, it unfolds in a bunch of different ways, honestly.
I love your description of inspiration and then moving into refinement.
Mm-hmm.
And your use of the word unfolding, which is a word I use a lot in my other work as a therapist. And so our lives are always unfolding, and we often have the illusion that this moment is everything, but it never is. It's always unfolding. And so I love that that's part of your process.
Yeah.
We'll be back with the final part of my conversation with Mariah Parker, but here's another track from the album Windows Through Time, Duende. That's Duende from Mariah Parker's album Windows Through Time. And now here's the final part of my conversation with Mariah Parker. And on Windows Through Time, the vocalizing.
So on Windows Through Time, I brought in, Brazilian vocal phenom, Claudia Villela. She's got a 5-octave range. She's just amazing, brilliant, soulful. That was actually the first time I've worked with a vocalist, and I was real excited about the prospect. Her and Paul, of course, knew each other, but they had never worked together. So it was another one of those ones where it was like, oh, this would be exquisite, and it would also be a joy to bring these two maestros together. So on that extended outro on the piece, it was an opportunity. I went, oh, beautiful opportunity to let them dialogue musically.
Yeah, it's lovely. Sounds like you had a great time putting this together.
Yeah, I did. It's been a great journey on so many levels, a great journey. Yeah. So, and I'm really happy to see it get out in the world. Was just notified. It's sort of chart bound on the jazz chart, and it's on the other two charts, and we'll see where it goes. It's sort of like you give birth, and then the project has a life of its own, and it's really gratifying that it's being so well received.
And what people may not realize, when we talk about being on the charts, is it's not about having a hit. It's about reaching people.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, people are receiving what you've offered. And that's the point. That's part of the point is, you've put this thing out into the world in order to contribute to the world. And so if people are receiving it, it's incredibly meaningful and gratifying, mission accomplished kind of thing. So that's really exciting.
Exactly. And to that point, one of the really delightful things is that Espiritu Samba is deeply inspired, by the musical culture of Brazil, which I just love. And it kind of goes a bit into a Cuban descarga at the end. But it's been really fun to see how enthusiastically it's being received in Brazil.
Well, Mariah, it's beautiful music. It's got a lot of depth to it, and something people can really, I think, work with themselves and enjoy and be led by into, opening up.
Lovely. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the music and the conversation about your process. I'm always excited to hear about how people follow their muse, and you're very intentional.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure.
Mariah Parker, thank you so much for talking with me about this great music, this new record, Windows Through Time, music inspired by the concept of the multiverse, the idea that all time and all possibilities in time exist simultaneously in time-space. Some of you probably saw the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, which really explores that whole multiverse concept. But just imagine that everything in your life, everything you've ever experienced, is just one timeline out of an infinite number of possibilities. What are the implications of that? And now consider this. What if you actually are moving through different versions of yourself without realizing it? What if we actually traverse the multiverse, but we don't know we're doing it? Have you ever had a memory that turned out to be absolutely not the way it happened? Well, maybe that was you experiencing your own existence in a different timeline. I know, sounds kind of nutty, but if you think about it, it's certainly possible. And what would that mean about the way we live our lives, about how we make choices, and about what we believe about reality? If it's not just this singular, linear existence, what are the implications in terms of the choices we make about how we live? It could boggle your mind, and that could be a good thing. So thank you, Mariah Parker, for following your muse, accepting the inspiration, and sharing it with us. Wonderful music, wonderful musicianship, wonderful composition. Thank Thank you, Mariah. Folks, if you'd like to know more about Mariah Parker, check out the rest of this record and her other music. Her website is mariahparkermusic.com, MARIAH, parkermusic.com. Definitely check her out. And if you enjoyed this episode of Paradigms, I hope you'll check out the Paradigms website, paradigms.life, where this episode and all 640-something others are archived. Or you can find Paradigms wherever you find your podcasts. And at the bottom of the Paradigms website, you'll find a link to my latest project, an audiobook, Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, narrated beautifully by Starhawk. I hope you'll check that out too. I'm going to close out the episode with one more track from Mariah Parker's new record, Windows Through Time. She talked about this one, Espiritu Samba. And let's let the word for the week be time. Let's be aware of time. What is it? How do we experience it? Can you slow it down? Can you speed it up? Can you jump from one timeline to another? How does the way you perceive time affect the way you live your life? I think that's kind of the point. You know, sometimes people are in a rush. They don't think they have enough time. And sometimes people take their time and go slowly. And these are all subjective ways of experiencing time, which means that you can choose how to experience time. You can slow it down. You can speed it up. Play with that. Time. All right, this is Baruch signing off for this episode of Paradigms. We'll be back next time with more inspiring people. Until then, let's be aware of time and be well. You've been listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life.